So again, my name's George Scott. I had a long and tenured career at Microsoft and recently thought I needed a change, so moved over to Planet Technologies in a very small team of people. There's 4 of us across the U.S. called Cloud Strategist. And our job is to help people make the most of Microsoft solutions in the cloud. And the advantage that what I really like about doing this job is that I get to be involved before the sale, but also after the sale. Planet has several different offerings that allow us to stay involved, and we do webcasts once a month, and customers can mail us and ask us questions and stuff like that. So my contact info is there, and Jill always has it if you guys are needing anything or just anything we can help with. Feel free to reach out. These are some of the services we have available. We only do Microsoft stuff. If we work with a third-party product, we just sub that out. So we're tied to the hip with Microsoft and been that way for 18 years. So this is a large consulting company. It's not a fly-by-night, and they have many, many different offerings and a great bench of consultants. They have a program called Evolve 365, which covers Office 365 and Dynamics. And basically, that's either a help desk, so you can outsource your support to Planet, but also training with like 30,000 videos on any of the Office products and Dynamics. And they're just little 3 to 4 minute videos that say, hey, I want to create a chart in Excel. How do I do it? And end users just love that. Another program we have is Azure Advantage, which is to outsource Azure support. So if a customer has, just like maybe an IaaS implementation with SCCM or something in Azure, but they don't want to spend their help desk hours managing it, we can do that for them and take care of that completely, and then be the help desk for Azure. And then our newest offering is this Enterprise Cloud Readiness offering. And I think you'll see as I go through the portal, and I would highly recommend that you either take advantage of this or leverage Microsoft, whatever. It's really important when you start using Azure that you set it up right to begin with. Those of you that know anything about SharePoint know that you don't just throw a SharePoint site out there. In fact, it got a pretty bad name out in the marketplace because of it being so easy for users just to throw SharePoint up and start using it, and all of a sudden it's a mess and you can't manage it, right? Azure is the same way. As you'll see when I go through the portal, it's 2 minutes and anybody can get a VM started, right? And it'll set up a network for you. So it's really important to get in there and set up all your security, the network access, how you bill and everything right up front. And that's what this readiness offering does. We, as I told you, we're tied to the hip with Microsoft, and because of that, we win many awards. And the biggest one is this All-Up Cloud Partner of the Year for SLG and Education, and we've won that 4 years in a row, blah, 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 tons of other awards. And now we'll get to what you guys are interested in. So this is a real simple thing, but I like to go through it just so that everybody knows what we're talking about. It was funny, I was on site in Raleigh on Tuesday, and the customer had no clue what SaaS was or PaaS or how you go there. So we're used to dealing with our own data center, which you guys obviously have, and you manage everything. You guys have gotten calls in the middle of the night where a hard drive has failed, or you got to do firmware updates on hardware. You got to manage software, the famous Microsoft Patch Tuesday. You've got to manage, and then you've got to manage applications. So right down from the bottom all the way up to the top, and then you're in charge, obviously, of your own security also. Many of you probably have some type of SaaS solution, either Office 365 or a web service or something that's out in the cloud, and that's known as SaaS, Software as a Service, over on the right. Basically, that's a company that takes care of everything. So You probably, some of you have probably run Exchange before. It was much harder to run Exchange than it is to run Office 365. Microsoft takes care of, everything from the ground up, the hardware, the software, and all you have to do is manage the accounts on there and individual settings as far as how it's deployed in your environment. So it makes it much easier. That is absolutely utopia. If you can come up with something that's affordable in the cloud and it's being run for you, like a student information system, and you can afford it and it works for you, that's the way you want it, because you're not having to waste help desk hours on it. As we start talking about Azure, the first thing that you'll start using in most cases, unless a vendor brings you a SaaS solution that's hosted in Azure, is infrastructure as a service. And I mentioned IaaS before, IaaS. And so infrastructure as a service / IaaS. And basically this means that Microsoft or your cloud vendor takes care of all the blue stuff down below, networking, storage, servers, virtualization. And all you've got to do is stick a VM up there that has the OS and your application on it. And you manage from the top up. So like that meeting I was in on Tuesday, I was talking about this and they said, yeah, but you patch it, right? No, Microsoft does not patch the OS because Microsoft doesn't have access to the OS. That's your software. You set up Windows or Linux up in the cloud and you have access to it. There are tools that Microsoft has that'll help you patch those servers, but you have to manage it. So this is, in a very simple terms, just an extension of your data center, a colo. And you can connect to it with fiber if you want to. So it can be as simple as a 100 megabyte VPN, up to several gigabyte express route connection. And literally you guys can, and a lot of higher ed institutions are doing this, starting to remove their third and even their second data center, and in some cases even their primary data center, and using Azure as a data center. And you can absolutely do that with Azure. Moving down the road, and this is something that you have to work towards, again, unless a vendor brings this to you, is PaaS, Platform as a Service. And what this means is that Microsoft is managing everything up to whatever you're using up there. So for example, SQL, Azure SQL, Microsoft patches SQL Server, and you put the databases on there. And all you're managing is the database and how people access it. Microsoft can manage a web server, IIS, or a multitude of other third-party web servers that are up there, including tons of open source solutions. I'm sure Microsoft has told you they're very much an open source company now. So all you have to manage is the applications and the data. So Utopia is SaaS, where you don't have to do a thing except use the service. The next best thing is Platform as a Service, but you got to walk before you run, and that's the infrastructure as a service. And it's as simple as firing up a VM up there. So I've got just 3 or 4 more slides, and then we'll go into the portal. And these slides cover what I consider to be the first steps, baby steps of getting into Azure. And I understand that each of you have an Azure enrollment. It may not be activated yet, but you're going to have access to Azure. And once you get access, I'll go through the portal and show you, how easy it is to start setting it up. But you want to think of what your first workload's going to be up there. Most customers in education have already moved to Office 365 or a SaaS solution for email. Don't want to mention the G word, or Jill will kill me. But they've got some SaaS solution up there for email, and you have to do authentication for it. The best call I ever got when I worked for Microsoft, Jill, I think we got a question maybe. The best call I ever got when I got
that was me laughing at your Google reference.
I saw it going across. The best call I ever got from Microsoft, I was an account exec, and I had sold Seminole County Schools Office 365. And about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I got a call from their CIO, and he said, George, you promised me if I went to Office 365 that we would have better service than we did when it was local. And today it's been out for 2 hours, and we can't get to it. And I said, Patrick, I know that Office 365 is not down for 2 hours. or I would have seen it come across internal email, and because that's a pretty big deal when Office 365 goes down. And so we started talking. He said, well, I can get to it on my phone, but I can't get to it on my PC. I said, Patrick, did you ever do anything about doing your authentication in the cloud? No. Office 365, or I'm sorry, ADFS is still sitting in the on premises, and somebody had cut their network line from their data center to the internet. So they had local network, and anything that was local on the Seminole County network worked, but they couldn't authenticate. And if anybody was already on Office 365, they might have had access to it, depending on how they were getting there. But if it had to authenticate with ADFS, it couldn't get on there. So I've always recommended that anybody with a SaaS solution for email somehow do authentication in the cloud. And I know there's several ways to do it. You might be thinking doing password hash passwords. That works. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're not, think about getting ADFS up in the cloud as your first workload in Azure. And as an added benefit, you'll obviously put a domain controller up there, and that will give you redundancy for Active Directory. Don't worry about these prices down here on the lower right. We did this years ago. Those prices have come down. My guess is if you wanted to do an architecture like this, it would probably run you about $8,000 a year or so, maybe a little bit more. It's not bad. As you guys know, it's a race to the bottom. So prices are pretty much going down as far as storage and CPU until they get to the bottom. The second one, and probably an easier one to use, is to do backups in the cloud. So everybody's got some sort of backup solution, hopefully, that works and is tested. The majority of people in today's world are still doing disk to tape, which works fine, except that in order for you to have offsite protection, you've got to ship those tapes off somewhere, which means that when you need to restore something from tape, or at least those ones off premise, you've got to bring them back on premise. In nowadays, with any modern backup solution that's worth a grain of salt, whether it's Microsoft or third parties like Commvault or Symantec, there's a cloud connector. So instead of using tape, or even in addition to using tape, you can do disk to Azure. Okay, and that allows you not to have to keep as much data on premise. So the customer I was talking to on Tuesday is actually going to do 2 weeks of data on premise. That's as short a time period as I've ever seen. I've seen people do 3 weeks before. But it is a fact that most restores, probably 90%, are done within the first 2 weeks of somebody deleting a file. So if they don't want to have a lot of storage on premise, it absolutely makes sense for them to go 2 weeks. And then if they do need to restore something from the cloud, it's there. The data is loaded. It's not like you've got to go to a tape library and load the tape to get to the data that's off-site. So it does make sense that you can do less storage. This is really, really easy to set up. I've got it set up, and I'll show you kind of an ad hoc demo where I did this on my PC. So I've had customers before that literally backed up individual servers that were out in schools, and PowerShelled in and remotely installed the Azure backup tool that I'll show you, and did backups into the cloud from remote schools. And then Microsoft also has a couple of its own backup solutions, System Center DPM and Azure Backup Server. Azure Backup Server being free, that will do disk to Azure. And like I said, that software is free. The only thing you pay for are the backups and the storage that's up in Azure. Those tools can back up any of the Microsoft workloads, and they have a VMware connector in them too. So if you've got VMware, in addition to Hyper-V, you can back up virtual machines. So that's a little bit of disaster recovery, right? We've got a backup of our software. If you want true disaster recovery, you have to get some sort of replication technology, whether it's on your SAN or using VMware or Veeam or whatever. Microsoft's answer to this is Azure Site Recovery. And you can use Azure Site Recovery to go site to site or site to Azure, which is the one on the right. So very, very easy to implement, works on both Hyper-V, on VMware and physical servers. It goes both ways. I've heard people say, oh, if I'm on VMware, I can only go to Azure. I can't come back. That is not true. You can go both to Azure and back. And as I was saying on yesterday's call, there's a lot of different values to this. If you get this set up, you literally have a copy of your data center of whatever you're replicating over in Azure. And so if you chose to, you could have, let's say, for example, a student information system replicated into Azure. And if they release a patch and you needed to do some testing or some dev work on it, you could fire up the replicated copy that's in Azure and use it as a dev test scenario. Okay. You could also use it as an elastic capability. So say your student information system gets overwhelmed at the beginning of the school year, you could flip the switch, fail over to Azure, add some more memory and CPU, maybe even hard disk space to those machines that are sitting in Azure, run for a couple of weeks until the students are in school and things settle down, and then fail it back. And the only thing you're paying for is the redundancy software and storage that's up there. You can also use this solution to get virtual machines up into Azure. It's actually the easiest way to do it. Other than that, you got to build an image and PowerShell it up there. So lots of advantages to Azure Site Recovery, and it's really, really easy to set up. Public websites. So if you got public websites that are sitting local, highly recommend you get those in some sort of cloud. And this is a PaaS solution that's drawn out here, but it can be as simple as taking your virtual machines and putting them in the cloud. And that way you don't have to worry about any type of disaster that could happen to your local data center. So just another easy one to do. And then last but not least, and I like this one here because you guys have $1,200 a piece to start playing in Azure. The easiest way you could use that without and being able just to turn it off. So say, for example, you put ADFS up there and you liked it, then you're going to have to come up with more money, right? You can't just shut it down. With Azure Security Center, you go up there and start playing with it and start monitoring some of your servers. There's some free offerings, plus it's not that expensive anyway, but you could burn some of that money and then be able to shut it down and build a business case to use it more as you renew and put more money into Azure. Okay. Do we have any questions before I go into the demo? Okay, cool. And everybody can see my screen? Okay, no problems, Jill? Because I'm not looking at the IM.
No, all good.
Okay, cool. All right. So this is the portal. And once you guys get access to it, some of you guys might already have access to this through Office 365. We had a question yesterday with somebody that wanted to add an Azure service and they had access to the portal and they couldn't add the Azure service. Well, it kind of fools you, right? Because if you have to manage Azure Active Directory, you do it from this portal, right? But that's not really, the Azure that we're talking about. They just call it Azure Active Directory because everything's based on that. So once you guys get access to this, Microsoft will set up your enrollment and you'll have access to this and you'll be able to start building out resources up here. The one thing I'll tell you is you only have $1,200. If you come up here and you start building a bunch of stuff and you're not careful, that $1,200 will go very quickly. As say, for example, if you were to build a SQL server in a day or two, that $1,200 could be gone if it's a big enough server. So be careful and make sure when you set up any servers up here, you've got them set up to auto shut off, which is the default, so that every night they'll turn off. And then make sure you check your billing. It's over here on the left, cost management billing, and you'll be able to see where it goes. And the reason I'm warning you about this is because Microsoft considers this to be a production instance of Azure. And just because you run out of that $1,200, they're not going to shut it down. They're not even going to email you and tell you that you're running out of the $1,200. And so you're going to go into the rears if you spend more than $1,200, and you'll get a bill from your reseller in the next few months And I've seen that happen. It's not a pretty situation. So start playing with this stuff, but keep an eye on your cost and make sure you don't go down. And if you get something up there and you want to go in the rears, that's absolutely fine. I think, and I don't know how it is now, but when I was with Microsoft, a lot of customers liked paying in the rears because they were paying for exactly what they used, and they were able to budget just on using the cost management and billing.
I actually see a lot of people doing that the first year. They have a low commit, then they monitor, and then so that gives them what they're going to budget for the following year. Yeah.
Yep. And as you know, if you think you're going to use $12,000 and you don't use $12,000, you lose what you don't use. So that contributes to it too. So if you know you want to use the solution, I would think that at least some of you are saying, yes, I want to do backups, or yes, I want to do ADFS up there, and you know you need to do that, and you want to go into the rears, there's no penalty. You just got to pay for it. So I don't want to make it sound like there's something wrong with going into rears. What's wrong is if you go into the rears and you guys don't know it, and you get a bill from your reseller, and you're not happy. So let's just be upfront about that. So let's just say I've got some stuff built out here, so I'll show it to you guys. But as the simplest thing that I could do up here, I'm just going to build out a server. And so I click create a resource, and right over here you see these are the most popular ones, right? But there's tons of them. If I click on compute, I'll see that there's Red Hat, a lot of other stuff that's out there. Reserved VM instances is something you guys will probably want to learn about if you do start getting stuff up there. Here's SQL Server. This is the one that gets most people in trouble. Same guy from Seminole called me up and said, why did I get a $7,000 bill on Azure? It wasn't supposed to be that expensive, and it was because they built a SQL Server out of the gallery. So they weren't using their on-premise SQL Server license. They were paying for SQL Server, and they weren't getting the educational discount. So be careful about building stuff out here. Just know what you're doing. Jill's there to ask questions. They've got a whole staff that can help you to make sure that you're efficient on doing this stuff. It's not rocket science. You just got to be careful of the gotchas. So just for fun, I'm going to go in here and click on building a server out, and we'll give it a very simple name. We can see that we have SSDs up there, so you can use spinning disk or SSDs, and then you can add hard drives to it once you get it built. So you can have a small SSD as your operating system drive, and then have data drives out there. Let's go down here. This password's got to be 12 characters. Type all that with 2 fingers like I do. I'm sure Jill uses at least 9.
While he's typing, one of the things I do, because I'm demoing so much, is that I'll have a virtual machine with like a teacher or admin account, and then a demo machine with a student account, so that I can show in real time what's going on. So even in terms of training, something like this comes in handy, because I just shut the machines off when I don't need the demo.
Yeah, and there's actually a version of this called Dev Test that's really cool. And I don't know whether you show that or not, Jill, but a lot of times in higher ed, a professor will be teaching a class and need VMs. And you can use Dev Test and set policies so that those machines can, a student can only get to 1 machine, or that machine's only running from 8 to 5, or it shuts down automatically, whatever. And that was something I used a lot.
I have an engineering school, higher ed, going to an executive briefing, and we have an entire session just on Dev Labs, just so they can understand it, because they have professors who, want to use it.
Yep.
Cool.
Okay, so I pulled down location, and I'm taking my time today, if you can't tell, Jill, so we don't finish too early, and because I didn't realize how long anything will take, so hopefully I don't go too long. You can see there are tons of data centers all over the place. There's like 40 freaking regions around the world, and I don't even know what it is now, because they're building them all the time. These things cost billions of dollars a piece. So when you're building out your stuff, pick a region that you want to be in, And one thing to be careful of, and this is something to lean on to Microsoft about which one you want to use, is that there are certain features that are in some data centers that aren't in others, especially new stuff. So some of the cheaper storage that when it first came out, it was only available in the Western region data center. Obviously, if you guys are on the East Coast, it doesn't make sense to use the West data center. But if you wanted to try out that new storage option, you had to play with it there. So just know, I remember SSD hard drives when they first came out were only available in East US 2, not East US to begin with. So a lot of people were in East US, and then they had some stuff in East US and East US 2. It doesn't really matter, but just pick the right data center to begin with on here. So we'll go ahead and use East US 2. And then here's the most important thing. There is something called Hub, which is Hybrid Use Benefit, that allows you to use Windows Server licenses from your education agreement. So if you have server licenses on your agreement, or if you happen to have a site license for Windows servers, you don't have to pay for Windows Server in Azure, okay? And so work with Jill and your account exec on how this applies to you. But if you do own it, you can click yes when you build out this server. You can confirm it. And now I'm actually paying the same price for this VM as I would for Linux. So I'm not paying for a Windows VM. And that is a huge cost savings. And those of you that are considering AWS, this is one of the advantages that Microsoft has over AWS, is you can't use your Windows licenses in AWS unless you have your own rack. And I'm speaking a little out of turn because some of this stuff has changed, but I think it's still the same way. Pick your virtual machine here. There's a lot of virtual machines out here. It's just showing the recommended ones just for fun. Let's go ahead and click View All. You'll see there's too many of them to figure out. So figure out which one you want. This is not the normal way you guys are going to do virtual machines. Normally, you're going to build your virtual machine on site, and you're going to get it into Azure somehow, whether it's PowerShell or Azure Site Recovery. That's how you'll do it. So you'll build everything on-premise an image, and then you'll upload it and tell it what you need up there. But this is what's in the gallery, and it shows you what the cost is. If I wouldn't have selected, these costs are a lot less because I selected the hybrid use benefit. So just pick which one you want, and let's just pick this one for grins. We're not going to build out the server. I just want to show you the next step. These are optional features. You'll see storage to use managed disk. What this means is that there are disks in different clusters in the data center. So this is how you get your SLA in for storage. So Azure writes data to 3 different disks anytime you write data, but this allows it to write to disks that are outside of that cluster. So if that cluster goes down, that rack goes down, then your data is still up on another rack. Same thing on availability sets. Okay, if you want your SLA, you have to create an availability set. This is basically just setting up a cluster inside the data center. Okay, only you just have to push buttons instead of having to build it yourself. So it's pretty cool. Extensions, you can build out tons of extensions out here. So these things, basically like building an image, we can add anything we want, including Microsoft antivirus, so that it's got antivirus in here. And you can add these so that they're in there automatically. Enable auto shutdown. I would highly recommend you guys do this until you have an environment you want to keep. That way nobody leaves their VM on overnight by accident. Monitoring, I'm going to show you guys a little bit of monitoring in Azure. If you want that to happen automatically, you turn it on here. And then backup, obviously, if you've got a production workload, you'll set up backup. That does it automatically. And then you click OK, and it'll start building out your servers on here. So I did this yesterday on a couple of servers. And if I pull it up, I can see here's a server that I built. And actually, interestingly, on this server, I built it using the cheapest one that I could find, and it only had 2 gigs of RAM, and like one CPU, and it was so unbelievably slow that I got frustrated and just changed the server, mid-state. So you can actually, these things are elastic, even while they're running, and you have to stay within the same type of VM, but it is possible to add CPUs just like in your own VMware implementations. You can add CPUs on the fly and storage on the fly, memory on the fly. And there are some restrictions on it, get with powers that be that go through those restrictions, but you can flip your VMs. So once we get this thing running, we can see that everything's here. I can give access to it. They've got tons of ways if there's a problem. There's like tons of advisors in Azure. So it's actually monitoring your server and will give you recommendations for security and health on here. Here's my network disk. We won't spend a lot of time on here. Here's the firewall, the change on there. There's a firewall on everything you build in Azure. You can obviously put paid firewalls on here. Barracuda has a SaaS solution. So if you're used to using Barracuda, I mean, there's a bunch of different ones up there. Here's your availability set. I didn't set that up because I didn't want to pay for it. But if you were using availability sets, it would be there on there. You can see configuration. Auto shutdown, we already turned that on. Backup, I configured. So there are some restore points because it backed up yesterday. And, I can, restore the VM. I can get into files. I can back it up. You build your policy just like you would your backup that's sitting on site. This is really cool. I talked about Azure Site Recovery. If you're doing that from on-premise, there is a little bit of infrastructure to build out, especially on VMware. With Hyper-V, if you're using VMM, it's literally pushing buttons. Azure considers VMM just an extension of itself. So you can set up Azure Site Recovery really easily on Hyper-V. On VMware, there's a little bit more infrastructure, but it's still pretty easy to set up. So we can set up replication. We can see that by default, it's going from East US over to somewhere in Texas, but I can go over to the West if I want. And now I've got, geo replication going all the way out to Washington or wherever that data center is going out there. And you can pick any of those data centers. And if I click enable replication, I've now got virtual machine replication going, geo replication happening that easy. It's kind of hard to beat if you've ever had to go through setting up clustering or any type of replication. Update management is a solution that Microsoft provides. So you guys are probably using WSUS or SCCM to do your updates. This is very similar, and I believe will work with SCCM. If it doesn't, it will. They were working on that when I left. So you can manage all your machines and schedule the updates. And then more importantly, it will give you feedback on if those machines are kept up to date. This is one of my favorite features, change tracking. You can turn that on and it'll actually monitor. I turned it on this morning, so it hasn't monitored anything yet, but it'll monitor events, files, registry, software. If somebody goes in and changes a service, it tells you everything. And by the way, this works on Linux also. So anything that you want up there is there. Okay. So now let's go back to what I was talking about backup. So let's say, for example, I wanted to play around with backup. Go to here and create and set it up. Leave it in the same data center, and we click create. So I'm creating a recovery services vault. Once I get that vault set up, and I'll go ahead and set it up, what the heck. Let's see if it'll take me to the next step so I can show you guys how easy this is. We'll go back to the other vault that I already have set up because that's going to take a minute. Wait a minute, it's right there. This looks like Okay, so this is the one that I just set up. Not sure that that makes sense. Let's go back to the other one. Resources, GS backup. I want to use this one because it's got some stuff in it, just so I can show it to you at the same time. So if you look, 3 backup items, right? So what these are the 2 virtual machines that I have, because I told them to back up, but I also downloaded some software onto my own machine. If I fire that up, free of charge, Azure will give you this backup software that can be used to back up individual machines. So remember I was telling you about that customer that used PowerShell and remotely implemented Azure Backup on the school servers? And then he remotely set it up, and they were backing up every night, and no longer did the tech have to manage that, right? So we can do that, and that's for a single server, and you can see that I set up a backup, and it backed up yesterday completed, and then I've got a weekly backup set up, and I'm just backing up files, but if I wanted to, I could actually back up, you know, the bare metal and the system state on here. So it is a true backup solution. The other thing that I can do on here and just go through the tutorial, I can tell it that it's in Azure or on premises, and then I can say I want to back up any of these machines. Let's say here, okay, and now I download back Azure Backup Server, or I already have DPM. So it's going to, you know, it tells me I can back up Azure Backup Server, or if I already have it, I can click here, and then it'll let me go through here and download the agent, and then you do a key exchange, and it'll give that software permission. So very powerful here that Microsoft gives you the software to either back up individual machines, so desktops or individual servers that may be sitting out in schools, or if you want to do one-to-many backups or centralized backup like everybody does, you can use Azure Backup Server, and the software is free. So if you think about how much Commvault cost or any of that other backup software, this might be a way that you could reduce your budget. Obviously, there's probably features in Commvault that Azure Backup Server doesn't have, but maybe you don't need those features. Maybe it's the Chevrolet versus the Mercedes analogy. So really easy to set up this backup, and this will give you, disk to disk. Even the individual one allows you to do offline backups in addition to Azure backups. The only thing it won't do is go to tape. Which DPM, if you still need to go to tape, you want to go to tape and Azure, you can use System Center DPM and get that flexibility. Okay, so that covers backup. And how are we doing on time? We still got 20 minutes. Oh, we're in good shape.
It's a quiet group today.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Well, you told them they were being recorded. I knew that was coming.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I told you that. Did you have a question?
Yeah, quick question on the backups there. You said the software is free. You just pay for storage?
You pay for storage and the backups. So they count the number of backups, and somebody at Microsoft will have to go through this because I've kind of forgotten exactly how it works. But depending on the number of backups you're doing and then the storage. And actually, you can go up on the Azure pricing calculator and price that out. But get Jill's help on it to make sure that that you're doing it right. She has a whole group of people on the team that I used to work on, the specialist team, that keep up with this stuff. And then, by the way, there are different tiers of storage in Azure that you can use. So, obviously blob storage is the most expensive, but then they have a couple of other tiers out there for that probably would work for you. I actually back up my NAS up to Azure, and I'm using one of the cheaper, cold storage, Jill? See, you can tell I haven't been here for a while. Cold storage,
It's okay.
or warm storage, whatever, and it's cheaper than hot storage. And then they now have a competitor to Glacier that's fully released. That was the one I was talking about that was only available in West. So if you just have archive-only data, you could use even a cheaper one out there. And you can have different tiers of backups. So maybe you've got some stuff that's being backed up to warm and some stuff that's being backed up to cold. Does that
I
make
mean,
sense?
the cold storage is incredibly economical. It's crazy how many zeros there are in that number.
The cold storage also, it's unlike Glacier, which you've got to go call Amazon and tell them, hey, put this online and I'm going to charge you to download it. It's not, yeah, they charge you to download it, but it's not near as expensive as you would think it would be. And they still give you like 2 nines instead of 3 nines of reliability. So it's not like they're just throwing it on cheap disks. They just lowered the SLA and started charging more for the egress side of it on there. So definitely talk to one of the Microsoft specialists if you're going to set this up and get some recommendations on there.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm in the Advisor, and this is just Azure Advisor, and all it's done, I built those 2 VMs out there yesterday, and it's gone out and said, I'm going to give you some recommendations, and these are all security recommendations, okay? And so this is kind of cool. What you'll find is that Microsoft is constantly monitoring, by default, anything that's in Azure, because if you're getting hacked, Microsoft is getting hacked, right? There's obviously redundancy and protections and walls and stuff like that, but it makes, it matters if somebody's in there beating up your servers. And so it's very possible, and it's been reported that Microsoft Security can reach out and say, hey, your server appears to be under attack, and give you some information so you can do it. So these are some of the things these are the basic ones, nothing like what I was just saying, but it's saying, hey, you might want a better firewall. You're using the default firewall, but there's other firewalls out there that if you want to pay for them, you can. Disk encryption on one of my servers is not enabled. Reboot after system updates because I installed updates yesterday and then didn't reboot it. So it knows that the updates were done and it hasn't been rebooted. And on and on and on. So constantly you'll get information like that. And then even better, in the Security Center, this is tied in directly to Microsoft Security, and they do machine learning against data that's coming in that's in those log files that we told to turn on out there. So you can get even more data out here and recommendations. And depending on what you're paying for, there's advanced Security Center where Microsoft will proactively take a look at your servers out there. Now, the beauty of this is a lot of the stuff that I've showed you, remember I talked about the updates and we talked about backup, change management, this security. You can actually add this stuff to your on-premises server too, on-premises servers. So if you're, Microsoft has people that specifically talk about this. This is what I used to do, but it's a great feature that you can probably replace your on-premises. A lot of people that are using SCOM are starting to use this or migrate to this and might be using both to begin with. It's kind of like the Intune versus SCCM argument, right? If I've already got SCCM, I'm probably going to keep using it and start, maybe using Intune for MDM, but eventually everybody's going to be using MDM or Intune, and this is the same thing, okay? All right, what else? Did I leave anything out, Jill?
Oh, every single time you're talking, I'm learning. So I'm just kind of following along.
I can't show you guys this. I really wish I could, but you should play with this when you get your enrollment set up. Because I'm using an MSDN subscription, I don't have the enterprise billing solution that Microsoft implemented. Probably 6 months ago, they probably bought it a lot longer than that. Microsoft don't move that fast. But within the last 6 months, they fully implemented it, and you get it free of charge in Azure. So once you get your enrollment set up, you can go in and take a look at this, and definitely, because you only have $1,200, please play with it and use the $1,200, but beware that, unless you're wanting to go over the $1,200 and go into the rears, that you turn off stuff as you're using it and you're done with it.
Yeah,
okay.
George, is this the thing about subscriptions and stuff like that?
Yeah, this covers everything.
Okay.
So like when you build it out, I found a slide that was really cool. David Ujola sent me his deck, and he has a really great slide that shows enrollments and accounts and users and how you set up subscriptions in Azure. And that all partakes in here. Once you have it set up, you can see all of that in there. So in higher ed, a lot of times you're doing billing within higher ed, so department billing. And so that can all be set up in here, and it works pretty well, a lot better than it used to.
Yes.
This used to be our nightmare, right?
Yes.
As Microsoft employees to have to deal with billing with higher ed institutions. So they bought that company. It pretty much fixed those problems. That and Dev Test, right? That was the other one.
Those are the two. Absolutely.
So they're all there now. So play around with this. Make sure you don't use the gallery to build a SQL server because you will be using an enterprise SQL license. So if you want to put a SQL server up here, build it and upload it. And that's all I can think of. And then let me just give another plug for what I was talking about to begin with. If you know you're going to start using Azure, and I'm not just talking about ADFS. If you're just doing AD and ADFS and backups, then it's not really that big a deal. But if you see a time in your future where you say, yeah, I'm going to get rid of a data center, or I'm going to get rid of data centers altogether, and believe me, a lot of people are thinking that, make sure you get Azure set up right to begin with. So leverage a partner, whether it's Microsoft or Planet, to help you go through, set up, your networking, the billing, all that, and make sure it's set up to begin with. There's something called resource tags in Azure that help with billing, and I've seen customers that went 6 months and then they said, oh, we want to use tags, and then you got to go back there and tag everything, right? So if you know it to begin with and you build out a governance model right to begin with and do it right, it's going to be a lot easier, and you'll be much more successful.
I have to agree with George. The people that I see who are the most successful in kind of their own transformation or their own cloud journey, because it's all about extending your data center in the very beginning, is what is a current pain point? What do you want to make better? Figure that out. Then engage with someone who's done it, whether it's a partner, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's another university, kind of hear what they did, plan it out, and then either dip your toe in with a small commit, and don't worry if you go into arrears because that's going to tell you what your budget is, or if you know 1,000% you're going to be hitting a certain number, do the Azure commit for that. But I can't really stress enough how important, when you're really ready, to kind of have a plan in place, because if you don't, you buy the commit and then it sits for 6 months while you're planning, and then you're concerned about not spending it. So we want everybody to be super prepared and have a good experience. So that's that's what I'm finding with our customers so far. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn the recording off so then it can be Wild West and we can ask questions.